The first knock came on a quiet Tuesday evening. It was the kind of knock you don't expect in the wilderness, deliberate, steady, and somehow patient. Inside the wooden cabin nestled deep in the northern woods, 12-year-old Ellie Parker looked up from her sketchbook. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of cinnamon tea wafted from the kitchen where her mother, Sarah, was humming an old folk song. Ellie's father, Jack, sat on the couch, boots kicked off, reading a dog-eared wildlife manual. The knock came again. 3 slow raps, not like wind, not like a branch. A hand. Or a paw. Ellie blinked. "Mom, did you hear that?" Sarah turned from the stove, her brows knitting together. "Hear what, sweetie?" Jack was already on his feet, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert. He crossed the room and peeked out through the curtain. "Nothing," he said after a pause. "Probably the wind." But Ellie had felt something different. She'd heard knocks before, on their front door, from rangers checking in or delivery trucks that got lost, but this one had a rhythm. Like someone asking to be let in. She didn't sleep well that night. The next evening, just after dusk, it happened again. 3 knocks. Slow. Solid. Then silence. This time, the entire family gathered at the door. Jack opened it cautiously with a flashlight in hand and scanned the porch. No sign of a person. No sign of an animal. But clear as day, right there in the snow-dusted mud, large paw prints. "Black bear," Jack muttered, crouching. But this close to the cabin? Sarah crossed her arms, unease setting into her voice. "It's not even foraging season. What would it be doing knocking?" Jack shrugged. Could be coincidence. Could have brushed against the cabin while sniffing. "But it knocked," Ellie whispered. "It's coming back on purpose." Jack and Sarah exchanged a glance. A protective one. They didn't want to worry their daughter, but there was something undeniably strange about it. That night, Jack moved the rifle closer to the front door, not to use, but to have, just in case. 3 nights in a row. Same pattern. Same time, just before full darkness. Same knock. No growls, no huffs. Just knocking. Ellie started leaving small bits of apple near the porch. Jack told her not to. Sarah was unsure. But Ellie felt it in her chest. Whoever or whatever was coming wasn't a threat. It was looking for something. Maybe someone. On the 4th night, Jack set up a motion camera on the porch. What he saw in the footage the next morning left the family speechless. There it was. A large black bear. But it wasn't charging. It wasn't rummaging or attacking. It stood on its hind legs, looked at the door for nearly a full minute, and then slowly, almost gently, pressed one large paw against the wood. Tap. 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 Then it stepped back and waited. Just stood there. Watching. Then it left. No food taken. No aggression. Just a visit. Jack replayed the footage again and again. That's not normal behavior. That's intentional. Ellie said nothing. But in her heart, a memory stirred. A fuzzy, incomplete image from years ago. Fur, honey, soft eyes, and a cold morning deep in the forest. But the memory was still a blur. What none of them knew, what the bear knew, was that this wasn't a random encounter. It was the beginning of something long buried returning to the surface. And the knocking wasn't going to stop. Not until they remembered 2 days after the last knock, the weather shifted. The temperature dropped, and snow started falling heavily, blanketing the forest, the dirt trails, and the old memories that lived deep within Ellie's heart. It wasn't until Saturday morning, while rummaging through an old trunk in the attic, that Ellie found it. A faded photograph. She'd been looking for her winter boots but instead discovered something entirely different, a small, slightly crumpled snapshot. A much younger version of herself, maybe 4 years old, smiling beside what looked like a bear cub. She blinked, frozen. In the picture, Ellie was bundled in a purple coat, cheeks red from the cold, kneeling beside a small black bear cub. The cub looked calm, not caged or chained. Its fur was thick and shiny, and its eyes, gentle, curious, looked directly into the camera. "Mom." Ellie ran down the stairs, the photo in hand. Was this me? And a real bear? Sarah took the photo and gasped softly. "Where did you find this?" "The attic trunk." "Was this real?" Jack looked over his wife's shoulder. I remember that day. He spoke slowly, as if dragging the words from a memory half frozen in time. That was the winter we found that orphaned cub. You must have been 3 or 4. Ellie sat down, stunned. I don't remember it. It was during a snowstorm, Sarah said, sitting beside her. Jack found it tangled in barbed wire not far from the riverbank. Its mother was nowhere in sight. We figured it had been killed by a poacher or wandered off too far. We brought it here for a few days, Jack added. Just until a wildlife rehab team could come pick it up. It was injured, scared. You were too young to understand the danger. But somehow, that bear trusted you. It wouldn't eat until you were nearby. It would follow you around. You named him Button, Sarah smiled gently. Because of his little nose. Ellie's chest tightened. She looked down at the photo again. And suddenly, like fog lifting, she remembered. A fuzzy snout. The sound of low huffing. The warmth of thick fur when she curled next to it during a nap. A bond she hadn't realized she ever made. But we gave him away. Jack nodded. To a sanctuary up north. He needed professional care. Ellie was quiet for a long time. What if the bear that keeps knocking is Button? Jack's brows furrowed. Ellie, I don't know. He'd be full grown now. Dangerous. Wild. But he's not attacking. He's not breaking anything. He's knocking. Sarah bit her lip. Bears can remember scents. People. Places. There have been stories, rescue bears returning to the people who saved them. That was nearly a decade ago, Jack muttered, though his voice wavered. But it makes sense, Ellie whispered. Maybe he got out. Or was released. And he found his way back. Jack stood up and paced. Even if it's Button, he's not a cub anymore. He's a wild animal now. We can't invite him back in. No one said we had to, Ellie replied. But maybe he needs something. That night, the knocking didn't come. For the first time in almost a week, the cabin was silent. But the following morning, Ellie discovered new prints in the snow, fresh, clear, unmistakable. They didn't stop at the porch. They circled around the cabin and paused by the window where she always sat to draw. And there, beneath the frost-covered glass, a single pine cone had been placed, just like the ones Ellie used to collect as a toddler to share with Button. That was no coincidence. Ellie pressed her fingers to the glass. He remembers. And now so did she. From that morning onward, everything began to change. Every day around dusk, Ellie noticed a new pattern, more than just knocks at the cabin door. Button had started showing up regularly, and each visit left a subtle trace. A pine cone. A carved stick. A paw print so fresh it steamed in the cold air. It was as if he was offering small gifts, like a child bringing treasures to a trusted friend. He's not trying to get inside, Ellie pointed out to her father one evening as they sat by the window. He just wants me to know he's here. Jack remained skeptical, but even he couldn't ignore the bear's consistent, almost gentle behavior. He'd taken to standing at a distance now, never close enough to frighten, but always visible. Sometimes from the woods. Sometimes behind the shed. Watching. Waiting. And then came the snowstorm. A brutal one. The kind that makes roads impassable and power lines snap. The cabin lost power for nearly 24 hours, and the cold crept in fast. Jack kept the fireplace roaring, but it barely touched the back rooms. As the storm raged, Ellie sat curled in a blanket, flashlight in hand, sketching in her notebook. That's when she saw him. Out in the storm. Button. He was just beyond the tree line, pacing in the swirling snow. Not aggressively. Not frantically. Just pacing. Dad, Ellie whispered. He's cold. Jack joined her at the window. He's a bear, Elle. He can handle cold. But what if he's not okay? She asked, tears brimming. What if he's hurt and just trying to be near the only people he remembers? That night, they left a heavy blanket outside the shed. Jack didn't like it, but he agreed to compromise. We leave food or shelter, we don't interact. We can't tame him, Ellie. She didn't answer. She just watched. By morning, the blanket had been dragged away, and fresh paw prints led back into the woods. 4 days afterward, Button didn't return. Ellie worried she'd frightened him off. But on the 6th day, just as the snow began to melt, he came again. This time, he brought something new. A smooth stone. Obsidian-colored, round, and placed carefully on the porch steps. Just like the pine cone. Just like the stick. Ellie picked it up with trembling hands and cradled it like treasure. "He's communicating," she whispered. The next day, she left something in return, a strip of soft red fabric, torn from her childhood scarf, the one she used to wear when playing with Button as a cub. By the following morning, the fabric was gone. And that was how it started. The routine. The silent language. The exchange. Every night, Button would appear, just before sundown, and linger within view. Sometimes he sat quietly, other times he circled slowly, as though patrolling. Ellie would leave something small, berries, cloth, her doodles rolled up in plastic. And Button, in return, left his odd but thoughtful tokens. It became more than a routine. It became a ritual. A bond renewed not by proximity, but by trust. Sarah watched from the kitchen one evening as Ellie sat on the porch in her parka, drawing. "She's different lately," she murmured. Jack, watching too, nodded. "More grounded. More awake. She's connecting with something old. Something deep." "You mean the bear?" "I mean her own heart." They'd tried therapy. They'd tried moving. They'd tried forcing smiles through Ellie's pain after her accident and the grief that followed. Nothing had brought her back from that quiet shell. Until now. And the townspeople began to notice too. Sheriff Gibbons stopped by with fresh firewood one weekend and spotted the footprints in the snow. "You got a bear problem?" he asked cautiously. "No," Ellie answered, stepping outside. "We've got a bear memory." The sheriff raised a brow, but seeing her calm face, the fire in her eyes, he said nothing more. Spring crept into the woods slowly that year, but Button remained a constant presence. Each week, he grew a little bolder. One morning, Ellie woke to find him napping just beyond the fence, sunlight glinting off his thick coat as he lay curled, peaceful, safe. She watched him for over an hour without moving. "I don't know why you came back," she whispered through the slats, "but I'm glad you did." And though he didn't speak, didn't growl or gesture, something about the soft huff that rose from his chest felt like an answer. Spring arrived in full bloom. The snow had melted into rivulets that flowed into the river beyond the trees, and the air buzzed with life. The forest was awakening, and Button, true to his quiet habit, still came each evening. Sometimes Ellie would spot him earlier, his massive frame swaying slightly as he walked the ridge above the cabin. Other times, she would wake to find another strange gift at the edge of the porch, a rabbit skull, an owl feather, even once a rusted old key, weathered and bent by time. Each offering fascinated her more than the last. Button's visits were like breathing, natural, expected, even needed. Until they weren't. It was a Monday morning, ordinary in every sense. Ellie finished breakfast and walked to the porch like always, expecting to see Button waiting in the shadows like he always did. But the woods were still. Too still. No paw prints in the softened mud. No broken branches. No obsidian rocks or pine cones. No Button. "Maybe he's hunting," Jack said when Ellie asked. "Bears wander when the weather turns." But she knew. She felt it deep in her stomach. Something was wrong. That night, she stayed up later than usual, sitting by the porch steps in her coat with a flashlight and the piece of red cloth he'd once taken and returned. But nothing stirred. The next day was the same. And the day after that. By the end of the week, Ellie had stopped sleeping. She scanned the tree line every hour. She called softly into the forest. "Button? Are you okay?" Hoping for a rustle, a growl, a shadow. But there was nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "I think he's gone," Jack said gently as Ellie sat beside the cold fire pit. "Maybe it was just time." "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't just disappear. Not without saying goodbye." But Button didn't come back. Not on the 8th day. Or the 9th. Or the 12th. The woods that had once seemed filled with quiet wonder now felt hollow. Empty. Watching her. Ellie began hiking into the forest after school, following old tracks and sniffing for signs. She carried a backpack with apples and dried fish, Button's favorite snacks, but the food remained untouched. On the 15th day, she found blood. A smear on a rock near the base of Hollow Ridge. Old, dry, but unmistakable. She dropped to her knees, heart hammering. "Button," she whispered, as though the forest might answer. When she came home that night, she didn't speak. She didn't eat. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look of deep concern. "She's grieving again," Sarah said. "Like when she lost Max." "This is different," Jack replied. "She believed in him. Maybe more than she believes in anything." That night, Ellie packed a flashlight, compass, and thermal blanket into her backpack and slid it under her bed. She was going back out the next morning. Deeper this time. Alone if she had to be. She couldn't accept that Button was gone. She wouldn't. Ellie didn't tell her parents she was going. She just left a note on her pillow. "I have to find him. I know something's wrong. Please don't worry. I brought food, a compass and maps. I'll be safe. I promise." She slipped into the woods at sunrise, her boots crunching over pine needles still damp with morning dew. The forest was alive with birdsong, but to Ellie, it all felt muted, like the silence after a scream. She retraced their old path first, the clearing near the pond, the ridge where Button once napped in the sun. She called softly now and then. No answer. Midday came and went. She ate half an apple and kept walking. Around 3 o'clock, she found the signs: overturned earth, claw marks in the bark of an old fir tree, and drag trails leading down toward a rocky gully. Her stomach clenched. Something had happened here. The tracks weren't fresh, but they weren't weeks old either. Ellie climbed down carefully, heart pounding. The gully narrowed into a ravine, and that's when she heard it. A growl. Weak. Strained. Then silence. "Button," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nothing. But she kept walking, flashlight out now. The air grew colder. The ravine opened into a small cave, half hidden by a fallen log. She crouched down, crawled through, and found him. Curled up in the back of the cave was a bear. His fur matted, one side covered in dried blood. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes opened, slowly, painfully, when he sensed her presence. "Button," she gasped, rushing forward before catching herself. He didn't move. Something had attacked him. Maybe another bear, maybe a predator. Maybe even humans. She fumbled in her pack, pulling out the apples and fish she'd brought. Gently, she placed them in front of him. He didn't eat, but his nose twitched. "I'm going to help you," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I won't leave you here." Ellie cleaned the wound as best she could with water from her canteen. She wrapped his leg using her scarf. Then she pulled the thermal blanket over his flank and sat beside him. The cave was cold. The floor was stone. But Button was alive. And he wasn't alone anymore. She stayed with him until morning. Then, she hiked back to the cabin. Jack and Sarah were frantic and furious until she told them what she'd found. Then their faces changed from anger to horror. "We have to call someone," Jack said. "A wildlife vet. Or the park rangers." "They'll take him away," Ellie snapped. "They'll put him in a cage or worse." Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "We just want him safe, Ellie. He needs help." After hours of arguing, they agreed on a compromise. They'd call a ranger they trusted, Ellie's Uncle Matt, who worked in a wildlife reserve one county over. Matt arrived the next day with a vet and tranquilizer gear, just in case. Ellie led them to the cave, heart pounding every step of the way. Button was still there. Weaker than before. The vet examined him from a safe distance, speaking in soft tones. "He's stable, but dehydrated. Infection has set in, though. If we wait too long, he won't make it." Matt nodded. "We'll have to move him." Ellie looked into Button's eyes. "Please don't be scared," she whispered. The sedation worked gently. They carried him out using a net stretcher, and Ellie walked beside them the whole way. As they loaded him into the wildlife truck, Ellie placed something inside the crate, a pine cone with a red thread tied around it. "He'll know I was here," she said quietly. 2 weeks passed. Ellie called Matt every day. Each time, she asked only one thing: "Is he okay?" Then one evening, Matt called her first. "He's healing," he said. "Better than we expected. We think he'll recover fully." Ellie burst into tears. And that night, she slept. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly. It had been almost 3 months. The cabin felt different now, emptier, quieter. The forest around them still held its timeless rhythm, but for Ellie, something was missing in its music. She often caught herself staring out the window, listening, hoping. Button hadn't returned. But Ellie didn't blame him. He belonged to the wild now, strong, free, healed. The last update from Uncle Matt had been clear: he's recovered. He's been released in a safe zone deep in the reserve. It's best if he doesn't return to human areas. Still, every now and then, Ellie left out a pine cone with a red thread, placing it gently on the porch steps. Just in case. It was the first snowfall of winter. Ellie stood by the window, warm tea cupped in her hands, watching the woods blur into white. The storm rolled in gently, painting everything in silence. She sighed and turned to go. Then she froze. Knock. 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 Slow. Measured. Familiar. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned toward the door, heart pounding. Could it be? Jack and Sarah heard it too. They stepped out of the kitchen, eyes wide. Did you hear? Knock. Again. But it wasn't the sound of a fist or knuckle. It was heavier. Slower. Like something brushing against wood. Ellie rushed to the door. And when she opened it, there he was. Massive. Majestic. Snowflakes clung to his fur, his eyes dark and soft with recognition. Button stood on the porch, not moving, just watching. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ellie stepped forward slowly. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You came back." Button didn't growl or snort. He didn't move aggressively. He just let out a low, gentle huff, the same sound he used to make when greeting her as a cub. Sarah gasped. Jack muttered, "I'll be." But Ellie didn't hear them. She crouched down just like she used to. Reached forward. Button leaned in, just slightly, and nudged her shoulder with his nose. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every day." Behind her, Sarah quietly snapped a photo with her phone, not to share, not for proof, but to remember. Then, after a long moment, Button backed away. One paw at a time. Into the snow. He turned once more, gave her one last look, and disappeared into the trees. They never saw him again. But Ellie didn't need to. She knew. He had come back to say goodbye. Not because he was lost or hurt, but because he remembered. Because something inside him, instinct, emotion, memory, had pulled him home. Years passed. Ellie grew older. The cabin remained their home. Life continued with its joys and heartbreaks. But she never stopped believing in what happened that day. She often hiked the woods, now familiar with every trail and echo. Sometimes, she found large paw prints near the riverbank. Once, a pine cone with a red thread appeared beside the porch, even though she hadn't placed it there. And once on her birthday, she swore she saw him standing between the trees, half in shadow, a guardian of the forest. The bear who knocked. The cub who remembered. The friend who never really left.